Well, Kerry, thank you so much for joining me. We've been Instagram friends for a while, but haven't had a
Yeah.
chance to chat in person until now. So I've really been looking forward to this.
Oh, me too. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so will you start by telling our listeners what Daughter of the King is about?
Yeah, so Daughter of the King is actually based on a true story. It's set in 17th century France, and it is in part a story of the Protestant struggle in Catholic France at the time. And it's the story of, as well, the Daughters of the King, which were young women that the King of France basically offered a new life to in Canada if they helped populate the region. And so my character Isabel is both a Protestant in the beginning, and she has the opportunity to become a daughter of the king and change her life. The problem with that is that she has to turn against the religion that she has fought for her whole life and accept this belief that she really doesn't believe and that she's been fighting against. And so it's her internal battle of trying to find herself.
As you mentioned, Daughter of the King is based on a true story of French orphans who settled in Canada. Do you remember the first time you heard about these French orphans or what it
Oh,
was about their story that inspired you to write a novel about it?
absolutely. So I was researching my husband's French Canadian ancestry, and it really was just sort of a fun project that I wanted to find out where in France his family is from, because they're from, his entire family, both sides, all the way through and through, is from Quebec for the last hundreds and hundreds of years. So no one really knew where in France they were from. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do this just as a fun little present for him. And so I started researching, and I kept coming across this symbol of the fleur de lis next to, you know, certain women's names from the time. And we're talking back like 1660s, 1670s. So, I mean, it took a while to follow the line to get back there. But I started researching, going, what does this mean? And then I saw something about filles de roi in French, which is daughters of the king. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. So I started reading about them, and I was blown away. I went, why don't I know about this already? Why didn't I learn about this in school? Because we're talking about, you know, 1665-ish,
Mhm.
and these women who were from complete and utter poverty in France, the king basically said, I'm going to give you the opportunity for a new life. You can move to Canada. I'm going to give you money, passage, protection. I'll give you the honorary title of daughter of the king. And when you get to Canada, I'm going to give you the opportunity to choose your husband. So they held interviews to choose the men, right? It's the 17th century colonial Canada.
It's
And
crazy.
it's crazy. And they were holding these interviews, and they got to choose the husbands, and the men said, okay. And they went into these marriage contracts. They got paid for every baby they had. And the most amazing thing is that, you know, early Quebec was completely through and through run by the Catholic Church. And they allowed these women to marry under a notary, not in the church, so that they could break their marriage contract if they wanted to.
Fascinating.
Approved by the church. Yeah, really. I mean, so yes, every time I read more about these women, I was like, this is amazing. I'm totally obsessed with it by this point. And then so I went through my husband's line to find how many I could find, and I found 33. There's probably more, but I kind of ran out of time once I reached 33, and I went, okay, 36 of them that he's descended from. It was really neat.
33 daughters of the king were
Yeah.
in his family alone.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. What I'm finding particularly interesting about this season of the podcast is talking to historical fiction authors like you about the research process. Some authors researched before the pandemic started, others did all of their research during the lockdown. So, what was research like for you?
So, because I started researching this really before I started as a writer, I had done a lot of the legwork just from, you know, my own family or my husband's family. And so I did that for a good year, 10 months or something. And then I was writing another book at the time, and I was terrified to write this book. I was like, I'm a new writer. I am not taking on wars of religion and 17th century France and the Protestant struggle and all that. But the story just kept tugging at me. And it was my sister who was like, you have got to write this. This is an incredible story that people need to know about. And so then I started really kind of digging in at that point. And that was pre-pandemic. And it was hard. I'll be honest, it was we're talking pretty far back in time. Colonial Canada was just starting. The records are pretty amazing for the time, but it was still tough. And then going back to the time in France, you can find the big picture items, right? Like you can talk about the monarchy and you can talk about what was going on in the bigger world of Protestants and Catholics. But to find the everyday life of what these people were living and what a Protestant would have done during the day and how, like, what was the name of the Bible that they prayed to? Like all of these things were really kind of hard to find. And so I spent a lot of time doing like library searches and textbooks, like a lot of kind of facts based, not very exciting, going through pages and pages and pages to find one little nugget of something. So it was a really long process. And then I think I signed with Black Rose before the pandemic. So I kind of bypassed that whole difficult time, luckily.
Were you able to travel, or did you need to travel to do any research? And did you have favorite sources, or was anything particularly challenging or surprisingly easy to find?
Yeah, so I really wanted to. My sister and I were supposed to go to Quebec actually last summer, and of course it didn't happen. And so I really didn't get a chance to do that. I have been to France several times, but I've never been to La Rochelle, where the book takes place. And so what surprised me that was really helpful was the Google Street View. Because I dropped into La Rochelle and then I would follow the streets and you could see the buildings and you could see, because, of course, France, well, and actually Old Town Quebec is exactly the same pretty much as it was back in the 1600s. So I was able to get a view of what the street looked like and what the layout was. And that was surprisingly helpful to orient yourself, to know where things are. And, I have a lot of action in this book. And so you can't just keep describing running down streets. Like you need to talk about, landmarks or whatever. So that was really helpful. And then, little things like I found a YouTube videos of a teacher she teaches fashion and how history kind of was shaped by fashion and vice versa. And she broke down exactly what people were wearing around the time of King Louis, and it was really quite fascinating. And she broke it down to the undergarments, to the next layer, to the next layer, to the hats. And I was like, oh, that was surprisingly helpful, because when you can't envision what kind of the dress looks like and the shoes, it was actually a lot harder to write. So these little things that came up not in your typical historical searches were actually really helpful.
So this is your third novel, correct?
It is my third published, yeah.
Third published. Has your writing process changed between your first novel and this one?
Yes, very much. So this was the second one that I wrote, and I was still a very new writer, and I found out through this process that I'm a revision writer. Big revisions, like starting over from the beginning over and over again. So I did that several times with Daughter of the King. And I was reading all the craft books and learning at the time, working with a great critique group. And so it was just sort of a trial and error thing when I was writing this first book. And then I actually put it away for a while, because you can only do so much. Your brain kind of was like, I need a break. And then I wrote another book, and then I came back to it. And so I would say over time, I'm still a revision writer, but it's getting cleaner each revision. It doesn't take quite as much time, I hope. So I think I just learned a lot more about the craft of it. Every book you write, you learn something new.
What advice would you give to writers like me who've not yet published their first novel?
Oh gosh, my favorite piece of advice is to not be afraid to write the wrong thing. I say this to people all the time, because I feel like writers paralyze themselves with fear. We're very afraid to write the wrong thing, and that the sentence has to be perfect and the word choice has to be perfect. And what if the scene goes wrong? And you've got a million choices, right? And so it's easy to stop yourself and think, I have to find the perfect one of those. And I'm here to say, you don't. It's okay to write the wrong thing. It's okay to write the wrong direction. And sometimes you'll write it in the wrong direction and you can feel it and you sense it and you go, oh, it's not right. And unfortunately, you do have to erase a page or two or three sometimes. But that taught you one of those ways isn't going to work. So you need to find another way. So I just really believe in forward momentum and continuing to write by intuition. And you can feel as you're writing if something feels off or not right, or, you need to change it. but you can't do anything if you're not putting words on the page.
I've not heard the term before, revisionist writer, but I'm afraid that might be what I am.
I have to say it's not the easiest life, but we make it work.
I love to hear what authors are reading. They always have the best book recommendations. So can you tell us a bit about your reading world? What do you like to read? What books would you recommend right now?
So I, of course, am like a avid historical fiction reader, but I read a lot. I'm in 3 different book clubs, and I just also like to browse the shelves and see what comes up. And so I kind of read a little bit of everything. But my first love is historical. And currently, my latest obsession is Ruta, I'm going to say her name wrong, Ruta Sepetys, I believe is how you say her name. She writes historical with younger protagonists, so she's actually considered YA. But I've read 2 of her books recently that have just blown me away. The most recent one was I Must Betray You, and it's set in 1989 Romania, and it's kind of what teenagers were going through behind the Iron Curtain, and it is mind-blowing. I mean, I read it in a weekend. I couldn't put it down. So she really is high on my list of favorites. Another one of my favorites recently, I think is one of yours as well, is Magnolia Palace.
Oh, yeah.
Which is great. I think anything by her, I'm like, yeah, great, sign me up. I pretty much read everything that comes out from her. So those have been a few of my favorites.
And can you tell us anything about your work in progress? What can we expect next from you?
So I've got 2 works in progress because I can't stop myself. The sequel to Daughter of the King will be coming out in March of 2023. So that rough draft is done. It's just sort of breathing for a little bit. And then I'm going to go back probably next month and keep editing that. And then I'm also working on actually a YA historical fantasy, which I'm in revisions for as well. So I'm kind of jumping back and forth between these 2 worlds.
I, of course, want to share how people can find you. Can you tell us where you hang out on social media?
I'm most active on Instagram. I find that's, I think you're like that too, right? It's definitely kind of my preferred platform. But I have to say I started TikTok and I'm really enjoying it. I did not expect to, but I'm actually really having a lot of fun over there. So I would say Instagram at Kerry Writes and TikTok at Kerry Writes. And then I have the same website, kerrywrites.com.
They say TikTok is like the next big thing for books, and I have not yet figured it out. So I'm going to have to follow you if I'm not already.
It's just it's this whole new world and this whole new language. And, I just sort of lurked for a little while and, checked everybody out. And then once I have kind of gotten into it, I've had fun, just reaching out to the community and meeting other authors that are kind of in our same position. It's been fun.
Yeah, Instagram's definitely been my platform. It's the one that I gravitate to the most.
Yeah.
I feel like most writers are hanging out on Twitter. Most readers are on Instagram, and probably now the younger readers are on TikTok. So
absolutely.
All the places.
Well, and I kind of wanted to get on TikTok because I'm my protagonists are always around 18, 19 years old. So I kind of straddle that line between adult and YA. But some projects like this one I'm working on is definitely in the YA camp. And so I got on TikTok just to kind of get in that world a little bit for those readers to see what they're looking for and what they like. And I found some great authors that I could read, through doing that.
That's interesting. I'm curious what draws you to have your protagonist be that age?
That's a really good question. My husband has asked the same thing, like, why do you keep writing the same time period? And I think it is just because for me in my life, that was the first big, huge shift in my life of being able to step out of what I was always taught. I knew it was an awakening of there's a whole world out there of things that I've never even understood or been exposed to. And so I like that moment of vulnerability where you get to learn something new about the world. I think that I'm continually drawn to that. I write a lot about found family is probably the most common thing in all of my books, because I love that idea of forming your own life as you step into adulthood and surrounding yourself with people that make you feel like you found another home.
Yeah. And take that natural progression at 18 into adulthood and then compound that with what the Daughters of the King experienced. I
I
can't.
know, and that's what's so funny about this. I think that's what makes it an adult book, is because she was 19, but she was like running for her life in the streets of France and was fighting the king, and the rules at the time, and so it's another layer of stress for that poor 19-year-old.
Well, Kerry, it was such a pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your book with our listeners.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's so fun.
Oh, it's my pleasure, always.